delighted to be here today with Charles Eisenstein and welcome you to Awakening Somatic Intelligence, dialogues on the science, art, and practice of embodied mindfulness. And I had the great opportunity to meet Charles yesterday at the Science and Non-Duality Conference, and I was so touched by the kind of tenderness with which you spoke after giving your presentation at the assembly. And I think I will start first by sharing a little bit of something that somebody said, view on your most recent book, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know is Possible. And Mark Boyle, the author of The Moneyless Manifesto, wrote of Charles. Charles is a cultural investigative journalist questioning the perpetually unexamined assumptions of both conventional and countercultural thinking. He is a cultural storyteller, a visionary who gives us a glimpse of what the new story of the people may look like, how we might get there, and how close we are to it. And I was so struck when we met how the kind of vulnerability with which you showed up around not wanting to get on stage like an authority that speaks from a kind of impersonal that is so-ness, but to kind of basically free yourself of those cloaks and to actually come into a different kind of dialogue and to not start from a place of not knowing and seeing what might arise as you drop into the connectedness with who is present with you there in the moment.
Well, thank you for appreciating that.
Yeah.
It's not like I have some, ethical principle about being on stage and performing that particular reality. But it's just sometimes I don't feel comfortable, and sometimes I do. And I don't fully understand what distinguishes those times. Sometimes I have the feeling that I'm really speaking to the audience as like an entity, as a being, and we're having a real conversation. Mm-hmm. And there is a place in this universe for, even 10,000 years ago, for storytellers, where people gather to hear a story. But that particular model of interaction is way, way overused today. Yeah. So a lot of times I don't feel good. Just when the whole setup, especially on a stage, and the whole setup is telegraphing to everybody, listen to this guy because he's up on the stage. And then, so that setup invites me to be like the know-it-all up there.
Yeah. And
I guess that's okay if I am the know-it-all, but what about those moments where I'm not plugged in to the source of knowing? Then what do I do? Yeah.
Yeah, so that possibility of being right on the edge of the unknown and how we kind of live into that in the moment, and the kind of sensitivity that we bring as a strength, in a way, that kind of vulnerability that you were feeling yesterday as a guiding, almost like a compass that you could navigate by.
Yeah.
Rather than compensate for in a kind of false play of, compensating for not quite feeling like you have it together.
Yeah, I think that's really important, especially in this day and age when we're facing such uncertainty. And if we kind of go by our old maps of how to get from here to there, how to create change in the world, it's not enough, and it's sometimes not even relevant when everything that was so normal and real and permanent falls apart, and we're in that in-between zone.
Yeah.
I think we're really getting thrust into that time where we truly don't know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how was that for you yesterday on stage with not just the live audience, but the people around the world following it by the live streaming?
Well, it was pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, I mean, I'm still kind of integrating it, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I felt uncomfortable. I felt, lots of different kind of stories about myself were being called forth. Each one of those stories associated with something painful.
Yeah.
And there I was up in front of, I don't know how many people there were, 500 people.
Yeah.
Going through that experience.
Yeah.
And the speech was, I thought, quite disjointed, and by traditional standards of what a good speech is, it was lousy. But weirdly enough, afterwards, so many people told me how much they appreciated it and were moved by it, and people had tears in their eyes and stuff. But it wasn't because it was a well-constructed speech.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really appreciate the way that you described how the initial response of what I might word as shame getting triggered, and how in a way the shame scripts kind of eat up what's happening on a biological level to biographize it to story, right?
Right.
And it's almost like the story is feeding on itself. The story of shame gets to feed on itself. And you described for a moment at lunch how you could actually be with it on a different level, and it seemed to kind of open like a portal for you.
Yeah. The shame was kind of transitory. And then it was just this feeling of real vulnerability and openness, like kind of like I'm like a little boy and kind of okay with that.
Yeah.
For me, it's very liberating to not have to be the guy with the answers,
Yeah.
and not have to be right about things. But it's also, I mean, because my cultural programming is so strong,
Yes.
to be the guy with the answers. I mean, in school, you get credit for producing the right answers.
Yes.
And
The last thing you want to do is be identified with the one that doesn't know. I see that, like, even with my children, they were so young, the way they'd push each other off were to say sort of like, I know.
yeah. Although in some circles, even like the confession that you don't know is the right answer. So it can get, I mean, any kind of spiritual principle can get adopted or co-opted.
Yes.
Yeah.
A compensation in a way, like a
Yeah.
false play that
Right.
happens in imposition. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so I just, I'm imagining that in those moments when you met people after the talk in that state of vulnerability, there was something more possible to share with them than just congratulations. Yeah.
Yeah. I liked it, actually.
Yeah.
It was, you get sick of congratulations after a while.
Right.
And I've been speaking for a couple of years now, and really feeling that there's something more. I mean, like this mental part of me wants to now make the connection between this and miracles.
Yes.
Which is like, anything that comes from the unknowing is kind of a miracle. If you didn't make it happen, then it's a miracle that it happened.
Yeah.
Right? It pops into your life.
Yeah. So the miracle is really describing something that isn't arising out of a doing, right?
At least in our worldview. I mean, if someone's deeply immersed in another worldview, then these kind of synchronous events, this experience of living in a world where the internal world is projected into the external world and reflected back, and of course, what you think of pops into your experience and stuff like that. For some people, that might not occur to them as miraculous, but we are on like the verge. We're like we're just barely stepping into that world from kind of a mechanistic, reductionistic, deterministic, force-based worldview.
Yeah.
So for me, at least, anytime something amazing like that happens, I'm like, whoa, like it's a miracle. And a miracle, for me, it's two things. One, I define it as something that's impossible from an old story and possible from a new one. But it's also, for me, an invitation into a new story. Because it says, Charles, what you thought was real and practical and just the way the world is, it's more. And I don't know, I can't say I've really, truly accepted those invitations. But fortunately, because like I'll have something happen, and I'm like, wow, that didn't just happen. And I that phrase, like, I can't believe it.
Yeah.
That's really significant, because that means I'm kind of refusing the invitation. Because if I really believe what these miracles are telling me, then my whole life would be turned upside down, which is happening in kind of slow motion. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love the sense that you describe of the miracle of, first of all, revealing to us what we took as the order, because we're not even aware of the infrastructure of that belief system of what is real, what we're taking for real. And then when something arises that doesn't fit into that, then suddenly the whole order is sort of made visible to us in a certain way. And we have this opportunity to really question what we take as the ground of reality, and as if that's as far as it goes. And suddenly it can change shape in a way, and everything else can become possible at the depths. It's almost like that little wave, or this little ball on the tree that is sort of pointing to the whole infinite that's allowing it to arise, rather than that's the ground.
I find miracles, and like I don't want to say, when I use the word miracle, it doesn't have to be some grandiose, thing, but just anything that doesn't fit into the worldview that I received.
Yeah.
Being born into this culture is nourishing for me.
Yeah.
Because I'm doing work, and a lot of people are doing work that just doesn't make sense from that old story of how reality happens.
Yeah.
And so I start to, at some point I feel doubt and even despair. And I question myself, like, am I doing any good? Am I crazy to be acting as if every choice I make has cosmic significance? Acting as if there is even hope for this planet. Because I have this knowing that a more beautiful world is possible. But the causality that I was brought up in says that it's impossible. I mean, gee, you're just one person, How could your actions make a difference unless everybody else goes along with it? But they're not you, they're everybody else, and you can't make them do it, and so it's hopeless. And so then I found myself very nourished by any experience that validates my knowing. Like I'm like hungry for miracles. Yeah.
I love that term, hungry for miracles.
Yeah.
It makes me have the feeling of children that rush into the street like hungry for the morning,
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yesterday at the Science and Non-Duality Conference, I did a workshop on perception and seeing if just slight shifts in the way that we're aware can actually change the body that we live in and the reality that we're living in. And so we just did these small perceptual changes. And within this hour that we shared, everybody in the room were able to feel their structure, their physical structure change, their physiological functioning change, the way that they move through space, or more specifically how space moved through them, change. And it does question this sort of underlying sense of what we generally take that object level awareness as though that were the ground of reality. Like, oh, if I want to change this body, I have to intervene somehow. You know, I have to manipulate it, or do something, versus just
exert a force.
changing how I am present in this that is a participative reality, in a sense, that I'm inventing and discovering at the same time, in the way that I'm connected to all that is. It's like, how does space actually live through me in this moment, right? And I think that was such a revelation, like you described, for the people in the circle.
Yeah, because if that's possible, what else is possible?
Exactly.
You know, what else do we take for granted as being frozen in material reality that's actually something that could be reinvented?
Yeah. And that's, to me, the great value of it, is that in a sense, the gift of our embodiment is that we're born into the most finely tuned feedback system that's ever been imagined. So how we participate is being fed back, and how the organism is actually reflecting itself in its functioning and its form. And so we get to tune our attention in ever finer ways, and so that we can have a sense of how we may have a non-local effect. Like when I was learning how to reverse the effects of radiation on HeLa cells in a petri dish over a distance away from the lab, many miles away, I could use the feedback of how it felt in my own system to rest in awareness in a particular way that was spacious enough that I could feel a new aliveness and freedom. That gave me the feedback of the influence it was having on the cells, even though I wouldn't know that feedback was delayed until the lab tested 24 hours later to find out how many cells are still alive, and to have, in a sense, a semnasium, a kind of a compass and barometer for how I'm participating, and to what extent that participation is kind of arising out of a compassionate and an empowered kind of creativity that is playful and open and interested. Yeah.
So what you're describing is a very different kind of, I like to call it a technology.
Yeah.
But traditionally, technology usually means a system for the application of force.
Yes.
And this is a different kind of technology. And I think that, and it's based on a different world story.
Yeah.
And I think that our planet will not make it without this kind of technology. We're not going to be able to kind of reapply our existing material technologies toward new ends and make it through the transition that we're in right now. We're called to have a much deeper kind of revolution, I think. So I'm really interested in things like this. I mean, who knows what's going to happen at Fukushima?
Yeah.
And you look around the planet, there are so many unsolvable problems, and if you really study any of them, you realize that it's essentially hopeless, according to what we've been told is technological, feasible. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
But
it's not solvable on the level that the problem was arose, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's like these near-term extinction websites, and they make like an airtight case that Earth will be uninhabitable by human beings in 50 years or 100 years. But the kind of technology you're talking about is totally off their radar screen.
Yeah.
And I know it's possible. I've experienced things like this from time to time. And and mostly like in the context of the human body, energy work of various sorts. But I think it must be possible on an ecological level, a political level, the same kind of work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the reason we're given this gift of embodiment is that we have the most conducive learning environment to awaken to who we are as these sort of creative participants in terms of awareness being a primary causative reality. It's not an additive more. It's not like, oh, here's the same problems and now we're going to observe it, at a distance and we're going to add our attention to it. It's that sort of structural more, like the sperm meeting the egg and exploding into new life. It's a whole different reality that can arise in that participation. And what better environment to wake up to the infinite, that consciousness that is arising in form and unfolding back into the whole at the same time than to actually be born embodied as we are.
Teresa, could you show me a miracle, something that doesn't fit into the reality picture that I grew up in?
Okay, I'd love to. It'd be really fun. Yesterday at the workshop, it occurred to me to share something that arose when I was teaching at Thich Nhat Hanh's monastery, and when I was working with the monks there in slow motion walking meditation, they said, oh, it would be so lovely if you could work with the children. And I thought, how am I going to engage the children's attention to go so deep and so intrinsic, and so I tried to think of a game that I could engage through, and the game became, if you could learn a magic trick, if you could make, for instance, one arm longer than the other in the space of one breath, would you be interested, in seeing how to do it? And of course they were like, you can't do that. That's impossible. Everybody was so sure. And so I sort of took bets like, well, all right, do you want to find out? And so I basically I did that. I used one hand, which is what I taught them, and each of them really got it, to create almost like, you're going to kind of slide your hand into a glove, that feeling of being able to create a kind of firmness through which I can move. And by finding space through my exhalation, just kind of kissing back to the infinite, I slid my bones through the sleeve of soft tissue. So I'm just going to take an inhale and then maybe make a slight, I call it snake breathing, like a little sound like a snake, so you can hear the exhale. So can you see the sense of the hands? Can you see the difference in the length? I don't know exactly what it converts to, but it's...
but that one's much longer now.
Yeah, yeah.
And is it bigger too?
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, well... Yeah.
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 Well.
Yeah, it's... as life is sensing itself, right, it's able to organize itself, like I can invite space through me and I can allow myself to participate with space in such a way that a new kind of vast spaciousness can arise intrinsically, right? And so our structure is not something fixed, nor is our physiological functioning. Even how I invite space, like that feeling of letting gravity instead of taking a step forward, that sense of being able to let space move through me. And now I'm a step forward, in quote, but that shift isn't from moving the object body in space, but by actually inviting the ground and space to reorganize through me. So this ability to to participate in a way that is much more self-organizing and coming into greater ease and spaciousness, freedom, aliveness, coherence. Even on this side, if I were to make just an open-throated sound, ah, can you feel where it vibrates? Ah.
It's vibrating in my head.
It's vibrating in your head, okay.
And here a bit too, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So it's you're participating in this energetic event, right?
Yeah.
But even in my structure, I can feel it's almost like if I were an accordion, one side would still be closed and the other side is, really alive with vibrations. So there's a frequency shift that allows me to have a much different participative connection to what's happening in terms of wave potentials or, what's unfolding in terms of my participation. And so our ability to attune ourselves, in a sense, to different frequencies so we can participate differently is a matter of a kind of fine-tuning of our awareness, right? And it definitely affects the quality of our presence.
A few things are coming up for me.
Yeah.
Like on the one hand, like your right arm is definitely longer. It looked like about an inch, I'd say. And your shoulder wasn't lower or anything like that, right? So
Right.
my rational mind is kind of checking it out, and offering different explanations. One of them, and I'll say a few of them, even though I don't even take some of them seriously, but they offer themselves. So one of them is this is some kind of sleight of hand trick, right? Another one is, you're doing something with your body and it's some kind of trick. Another one is that there's something structural that's changed, and the way that the wrist bone's connected to the elbow bone, et cetera, is changed and the muscles have relaxed, and so there's kind of this mechanistic. I mean, it was still quite amazing that you would be able to induce such a mechanistic change.
Right.
Then there's another interpretation which starts to get even weirder or more out there from my normal reality picture, which is that the connections inside of your arm haven't actually changed. Nonetheless, that arm is still longer than that arm. Another related interpretation is that what you actually did was change my perception of you. And then another level of interpretation, and this is where I start to actually embrace it, is that the apparent distinction between is it a change in my perception or is it a change in your body is a false distinction.
Yes.
Because my perception and who you are not two separate things.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of shifting an entire reality that includes both of us.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the evidence alone, which is what I remember seeing, cannot distinguish between any of these 6 interpretations. So which one do I believe? Since the evidence can't decide it, which do I believe? And I face this problem all the time, even if I read, I don't know, I'll read about some healing modality, and then I'll read a skeptical review of that healing modality. Each side believing the other side to be closed-minded and ignorant and less intelligent. But in fact, it's impossible to choose on the evidence. So I find that instead I like to choose on what belief makes me feel most alive, What belief...
And that is in itself an interesting evidence. In other words, when I try this on
it's
as
a different
hypothesis,
kind. That's right. Yes.
what happens, right? How does that influence the, quote, reality in which I live? And I think that's probably the most important piece of evidence, what arises in our direct experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, to actually, like, you already have this beautiful fluidity with which you can explore these stories. In other words, you're not taking any for the ground of reality. You're seeing them as stories, and you're recognizing that they're basically postulates that we make for a purpose. And you begin to recognize what purpose they serve, what they're actually serving.
Because they're not just isolated intellectual constructs,
Yes.
these different interpretations. There's an emotional content. And like one thing that comes up in me is like this feeling of inadequacy, a little bit, like it's like, wow, Risa can do that, but I can't do that. Like I'm not something enough to do that. And so if I allow myself to feel that, then I can say, okay, here's something that hurts. But if I don't allow myself to feel it, I'll escape into a story to kind of, escape that feeling. So that story might be, well, she's not really doing it. Therefore I can still feel okay about myself, right?
Right. You can sort of attack the object of perception in a sense to try to alleviate or avert the sense of shame that gets triggered, right? The story of the shame script eating the experience up, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's because anytime we compare ourselves with one another, there's that violence that happens, right? Where our present experience is basically eaten up by the shame script. It's making more story out of itself. And at the same time, you could have that sense of, like, I don't even know where that went. And if what follows that sense of not knowing is interest, right, then something entirely different arises.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say that feeling of inadequacy was the dominant feeling.
Yeah.
There's a lot more of just like this kind of awed curiosity.
Yeah.
It's also a very youthful feeling. It's like, wow, I'm young again. I'm in this magical world.
Yes.
Where I haven't learned everything yet,
Yes, isn't that sense of wonder that arises, and that to be able to use the portal of not knowing as our entry into the wonderland of possibility.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, I had that experience, actually. I brought it back to the States because it was so successful in France with this group of, international children, kids from all over the world, that I brought it into some of the schools to see how they would respond here. And what was really striking, I remember taking some time to close up the video equipment because they were recording and meeting with the teachers after, and the kids were real excited. And as we were walking to the parking lot, I saw the soccer team actually relating to the people on the basketball court, the kids on the saying, "Hey, you want to see something?" And suddenly I'm seeing like dozens and dozens and dozens of kids actually extending and sort of seeing how far they can go, how many bones could they extend. And it was such that kind of critical mass level of once they see that it's possible, right, then everybody can do it, right? Kids who weren't even in the program now are like, oh, okay, let me see what that's like. And just imbibing just from the sense of possibility, right? Something else is possible, finding their way into it, just out of their own curiosity.
Yeah. So what I'm thinking is, wow, what would it be like if we could take that kind of co-created, emergent sense of possibility and apply it not to lengthening our arms, but apply it to, healing the criminal punishment system,
Yes.
or bringing peace to.
And even what you were talking about earlier, like technologies, these sort of dead technologies, to actually extend our presence through the technology to participate in a much more creative and compassionate way through the technologies that we have.
Right.
Just like you can extend your presence through your arm and make your arm participate completely differently with space, right? And gravity, all these things that, we think, oh, I have to lift myself up against gravity, but that feeling of just letting gravity have its way with me and participating in a way that's non-adversarial with gravity, right? That sense that we can play with anything in that way, yeah? Kind of like the little waves atop an ocean, to start sensing as the ocean, rather than identifying with these little sort of sandcastles at the edge of the sea, kind of, where we have to keep defending, upholding, protecting, because our existence is threatened, versus sort of knowing ourselves as the sea itself, and so we can creatively emerge into some new expression as the dangerous opportunities appear. It's a different kind of creation story that's living in the here and now.
When you say that, I was actually letting your words kind of wash over me and tuning into the voice beneath the words, which means that I don't really have words to respond to you.
Moved to be taken in at that depth on the silent level, because that's where we need to be able to, that's where new possibility is going to arise. The willingness to sort of drop the verbal level and the abstractions that don't have a connection to what's emerging in the now, to renew themselves, to actually come back into connection to what's happening here and now, so that life can sense itself new from this moment. Yeah, and from that, a new story can appear.
Yeah.
Much more soul engendering.
I mean, nothing against abstractions and conceptual play.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah.
But I think it's a little bit overused these days.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's where creativity is going to arise. Yeah, I know Einstein even talked about when people said, well, how did these ideas come to you? And he said, well, they didn't come as ideas, right? They came as this, he said, it's sort of like a vague kinesthetic sense. That's how he described it at first. But if I tuned in and stayed with it, eventually it would emerge into or unfold as a sense of relationship, and that might take the form of a mathematical, I could start to see it in terms of mathematics, or I'd see an image that expressed that relationship. And the very last thing that arose were the words that I could describe it with. And being able to stay with that impulse that is arising and wanting to be seen, yeah, but that's emerging. The word that I use is the word that Bohm used to use, relevate, that meanings will elevate spontaneously into consciousness out of their relevancy from the flow of that we're tuning into, right, of this morphogenetic field.